Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and today we are talking about a place in Ontario that was described by our guest on the show as having every little bit of Canada's story. We are talking about Wawa, Ontario. We've talked about this place on the podcast before. It was part of the Oba Lake drug bust, as well as, of course, being very famous for the Group of Seven and A.Y. Jackson, names that you've heard if you've listened to this podcast previously before. And today we spoke with Johanna Rowe, who is an author as well as the owner of J. Rowe Heritage Consulting. And we talked to her about the great history and landmarks of Wawa. Bill delves into why it's his absolute favorite place to visit. And I asked Johanna if she had unlimited resources and no red tape, what she would do to help with the declining population. Well, today we are joined by Johanna Rowe, who owns J. Rowe Heritage Consulting in Wawa. Johanna, welcome to the show, and why don't you give listeners a bit of a rundown on what you do at J. Rowe Heritage Consulting?
Well, thanks, Ben, for inviting me to the show. I do a variety of different things, but my passion is the history of the area. And over the years, I've been asked to provide text for plaques and signage. I've been asked to do some cultural heritage assessments for properties that are going to be developed. And I've been asked to do guided tours for people to different historical spots, and just basically anything that I can do to share my passion for the rich history in the Wawa area. I'm happy to help anybody with that.
So Bill, why don't we throw over to you? Why don't you explain your connection to Johanna and what got you kind of interested and connected with her?
Well, Johanna is probably, I was listening to her, and the key words are, one key word is passion. She is so passionate about the Wawa area that goes, and she's written a number of books, and this will come out in our exchange for sure. And Wawa does have a rich history. But if you were to go to Wawa and have to contact one person, it would be she.
We've talked a little bit on this show previously of a couple of things that are connected to the Wawa area. One of them, of course, was the Oba drug bust.
Yep.
And one of the things that you said to us to me before we started recording was Johanna was actually the first person you contacted when you wanted to write that story.
Yeah, well, we've done a number of stories, or I've done a number of stories as Backroads Bill, but she is the go-to, and that's another reason why she was on the list of having on the show, and we're glad to have her today.
Awesome. And Johanna, one of the things that we wanted to touch on a little bit here, Bill didn't give me any background on this. He just said something to do with there's these door frames in Wawa. So why don't you tell us a little about what these door frames are?
So they're an actual door. It started as a project called Grandma Doors, and it was started by Lori Johnson, our past director of tourism and recreation here in Wawa. And she picked up on this project from, I believe, Marquette, Michigan. And it basically, we ended up encouraging the community to paint over 200 doors, focused on the importance of our grandmothers and their stories in the community. So when they came, why they came, what was so special about them. And each door was the size of a door. So we had this human size, replica of all of our grandmothers in the community. So that evolved into, being heritage doors for all different community members that had some unique or significant role to play in the post-history and pre-contact history of the Wawa area. So there are First Nation people represented, voyageurs, early Hudson Bay adventurers, travelers across Canada, as well as local treasures that are significant to the Wawa people, like people who were important to the downtown aspect, or people who discovered something, but we also have national characters who had a special place in Wawa's history as well, like Glenn Gould and A.Y. Jackson. So the doors have evolved over the years, and they've been placed in central locations throughout the community to encourage people to go to all these different spots and explore. And it was just a really great project. It it kind of ended about 10 years ago, but now we still have these doors. We maintain them, and we're talking about perhaps expanding them a little bit in the future as well, too.
Yeah, I must say this, and I've said this in stories before, because of this project, and even before that, Johanna well knows this. I think Wawa has done tourism better than most communities, small and large. First of all, going way back, it was the signage that I thought was, wow, they're really, really ahead of the game. And then with the door project, this is something that, again, not that people have to replicate anything, but people, I think communities have to, from a tourism perspective, really, really do that, because you want people to kind of, I had this tagline when I was doing geocaching: search, see, stay, and stay a while. But the whole aspect is have people stay in your community, and I think Wawa does it better than most.
But why doors? Like, what's the significance behind a door versus anything else? Is there a reason?
She'll tell you about that.
Okay, over to you.
I don't know. It was just, it was a project we borrowed from over in Michigan, and it just, I think it works because it's the size of a human, right? And you go through a door, and I've used the analogy of, they're a portal to our past. So you're kind of walking through the door into our past. And the doors have two sides. So there's somebody on each side, or there's some story on each side as well, too. So that's it. It really stands out when you see a door on the side of a road. It grabs your attention.
Yeah, and you want to stop and see these. And we're going to talk about various aspects of Wawa history, and we'll probably be jumping around a little bit, because there's the indigenous history to the whole area in Lake Superior, and people need to go down to Sandy Beach because there's a whole bunch of things going on down there, including doors and whatnot. But tell us a little bit, and for the listeners that in the North Bay area in Northern Ontario, about I think one of the significant, and some of those people are on the doors, about I think Wawa really came to as far as colonial history with the opening of the highway. Just take us back there for a moment, and then maybe transition to how the goose came about, because it's probably the most photographed icon in Canada, and of course everyone stops there. And now, if I just did this story, what is there, 3? It's the 4th goose or the 3rd one. Anyway, over to you.
Yeah, so Wawa was very remote until 1960, when the Trans-Canada Highway finally came through the area, and it was a bit of a fight between us and Chapleau to get the province and the country to figure out what was the best way logistically to send the highway across the rugged landscape of Lake Superior. So finally in 1960, the last link of the Ontario portion of the Trans-Canada Highway was completed to Wawa, but it was just on the outskirts of Wawa. So the businessmen in the community were like, well, wait a second, you don't even see the town really when you're kind of sliding by a kilometer out. So Jerry Sprang, Mel Phillips, and Al Turcotte came up with this idea to recreate the namesake, what they thought was the namesake at the time of Wawa, being an Ojibwe word for wild goose. So they, out of pocket, Turcotte commissioned a gentleman who was responsible for the dinosaurs at the Royal Tyrrell Dinosaur Park in Alberta to come and make a large goose out of chicken wire and plaster and stick it on a platform on the outside of Wawa, welcoming people into our community. That goose didn't last so long. Anybody who's lived a year in Wawa knows the weather is not always the greatest, especially in the winter. So it was replaced by a second goose in 1963, made of rolled coiled steel from Algoma Steel, which of course Wawa's iron mines were providing the iron for. So that was much more representative, and it lasted quite a while. It was replaced just during the 150th anniversary of the province of Ontario, and I guess it was the 70th anniversary of the highway going through. So anyway, we have brand new goose. It's bronze underneath. It looks lovely. And it's sitting on a new pedestal that looks like a chunk of Canadian Shield rock. So it's going to last forever, we've been told. I think there's a 100-year warranty on it, but it certainly stops traffic, literally, and people stop in, get their picture taken with Goose, which, I would argue is probably one of the most iconic big highway monuments across the Trans-Canada Highway.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the impact and of course the iron ore mines were open for quite a long time, but tell us about the impact on Wawa and then what happened when they closed down.
Yeah, so there was a little gold boom in 1897, and while the gold boom was going on, they discovered a really rich vein of iron ore on the mountain that shadows Wawa. It's this massive mountain of ore, turned out, that's at the north side of Wawa Lake. It was developed as the Helen Mine from 1900 to 1918, and it was the harbinger for Francis Hector Clerc to start up Algoma Steel and Sault Ste. Marie, the Algoma Central Railway, the Algoma Central Steamship Lines, Algoma Electric and Power, which is Great Lakes Power today, or Evolution. All of these industrial enterprises happened because of the rich ore body that was discovered in Wawa. The mine shut down for a few years, and then when the Second World War started occurring, and Sir James Dunn was helping out Sault Ste. Marie, getting the steel plant going back up and running down there, Wawa burst back to life again. Obviously, iron and steel were a major commodity at that time, and the mine stayed open until 1998. So it was almost 100 years of iron mining in the Wawa area. Of course, we boomed during the 50s and 60s, like much of Canada. We prospered. We had lots of immigrants coming from post-war Europe. The community was up to almost 5,000 people. There were over 2,000 people working at the mine and the sinter plant operations operated by Algoma Ore Properties. But with many things in a boom and bust community in Northern Ontario, there's usually a bust coming along the way somewhere. So that happened in 98, and it was a big hit to the town. We had some lumbering operations going on, a strand board mill, and gold mining has always been in the background, but gold mining has helped to maintain us as well too. But we did lose a lot of employees. Moved down to Sault Ste. Marie to work with Algoma Steel, and we haven't really bounced completely back since then. But I think Wawa is learning to reinvent itself a little bit and look at the different assets that we have in the landscape in this area that attract people and tourists and quality of life.
Do you want to give some examples on like just what you just said with like what Wawa's doing? And I know we talked about the doors and stuff, but is there anything that is kind of in the works or has really kind of taken off in the last few years that has attracted a lot more work and people?
Well, I think the gold mines really are just kind of on the outskirts of Wawa. There's a couple of operations that are closer to the community that are under development right now, and we're looking forward to us feeling more direct impact from that, with it just being on, just outside the municipal borders. It's been a struggle. Like, I don't think we've figured out the magic sauce yet to get Wawa back up and running like it was in the past. I don't think we can ever say we're gonna be like we used to be, right? We've evolved, and I think things like tourism opportunities and providing residents and ex-residents coming back, because we have a hospital, we have an airport, we're like a regional center for community activity, or for health services and whatnot. So education, that's, I think, our draw right now. The local businesses are doing all they can to just survive COVID and also the challenges of having less people in town. And I think a lot of Northern Ontario communities that used to be much bigger and they had infrastructure for a lot more people, and now there's less. The age is declining as well too. So we're not there yet, but I think that tourism, and we're getting more people coming back to the community, retiring to our area because they miss that small town feel and it's the affordability in some areas.
Yeah, it's the same as North Bay though, because a lot of times North Bay became a retirement town, right? And now it's kind of getting to the point where, because we have the college and university, that's where we kind of get that nice turnover of age. But if we didn't have that, in 40 years, give or take, it would be probably pretty tough for us. So there's definitely some empathy there with the way that Wawa, it's kind of trending, though hopefully like it kind of goes the other way. But if you, Johanna, there goes my mic. If you could do whatever you wanted, there's no red tape, you were able to do whatever you wanted, what would you do to the city to just kind of like, what's your vision? Like, what would your vision be?
Well, if I had access to funds and carpenters and designers, I think our downtown area needs a whole complete makeover. We've got a lot of buildings that have not survived the last tenant or ownership, because there's no mom and pop business to take it over. So if we could, reinvent the downtown core, and I think Wawa could be that hub of enjoying the beauty and then the landscape of the east shore of Lake Superior, and be like a cultural hub for recognizing and acknowledging the First Nations, but the French, the Métis, the immigrants that came here for mining. Wawa is really an example of Canada, like the whole tapestry of what makes us as Canadian, all the different people that are attracted to the landscape for whatever resource, whether it's trapping or copper or gold, or it's a trade route, or into the mining businesses, canoeing and paddling, logging, commercial fishing, shipwrecks. It's every little bit of Canada's story, I think, is represented here in Wawa, and that doesn't even include people like Glenn Gould and the Group of Seven that were, for whatever reason, right, were inspired by the landscape as well on a different level.
Yeah, that's a good segue, because I'm drawn to Wawa all the time, but there are others that have been drawn to Wawa, especially Glenn Gould, the famous Canadian pianist. And so maybe, and of course, that was part of the aspect that you leading tours. But tell us a little bit about Glenn and his attraction to Wawa.
So I don't think anybody can say they know exactly what was going on in Glenn Gould's mind ever. But he did say that there was something about the Wawa landscape that just kept drawing him back here. And he was inspired to do, he said, some of his best composition work and his best brain work. And just he would go for walks at Sandy Beach or along the Magpie River at our numerous waterfalls in the area. And he would reserve one or two rooms, the same rooms at the Wawa Motor Hotel, for a couple weeks at a time, and just hole himself up in the room, and he would compose, and he would write for CBC. And I don't think he really knew what it was that attracted him here, but it just, there was something about the landscape and the people that had an effect on his artistic abilities.
Yeah, I think listeners should just Google the National Film Board documentary in Glen Gould. It'll come right up, and you'll see many of the landscapes in the Wawa area. Again, one of the stories I did, there's an epic photo of him at Silver Falls on the way to Sandy Beach and near Sandy Beach and no, on the way to Sandy Beach and so that's again another claim to fame for Wawa. Another thing before we talk about A.Y. Jackson, but I thought, tell us a little about, and we're kind of going back in time now, but tell us about the Fur Post Cemetery and what you're doing about that, because it is a recent story I just did. It's one of the 4 oldest colonial cemeteries in Northern Ontario.
Yeah, so our fur trade history, of course, goes way back. When the Europeans were first coming through, they met up with the ancestors of Mishpecotton First Nation and were welcomed to the land and saw rich fur resources. And the first post was established in 1725, and it was independent traders, French traders, the Northwest Company, and then the Hudson Bay Company, which ultimately took over operations in 1821 here and became the headquarters for the entire Lake Superior district. So during that time, Angus Bethune and Louisa Mackenzie Bethune lived at the post, and there's a cemetery across the river from the fur trading post that you can access when you're driving to places like Sandy Beach. That you wouldn't know it was there unless you saw the heritage door that is at the entrance to the trail. And it is this tiny little cemetery. We think there's a dozen to 24 people in it, but Louisa Mackenzie Bethune's headstone is there, and it dates back to 1833. And I believe she was only 40 years old when she passed away. And just the story of the headstone, I'd love to know how it got there, and it would have had to come by canoe. From somewhere in Southern Ontario. Yeah, I couldn't imagine, right? Putting that in a canoe and bringing it up. The headstone is there. There's a couple of other headstones that are more recent, but it's a fabulous little spot. And we really do think that it has antiquity that is unsurpassed in Northern Ontario. Might be the oldest headstone in Northern Ontario. But she, of course, and her husband, Angus Bethune, represent the marriage between, the two cultures. She was half First Nation Ottawa-Pascat, I believe, from out west, and she really represents the importance and significance of First Nation element, of course, but also Indigenous women in the fur trade, and how the relationship there was instrumental to the fur trade existing and the industry being able to survive and prosper and be such a part of the Canadian tapestry. And I think that what I've been trying to do is get that cemetery recognized by the Historic Sites and Monuments branch as a representation of the Indigenous female contributions to the history of the fur trade in Canada.
Now, Johanna has has authored a number of books, and the one that's coming down the pipe in the future is going to be about A.Y. Jackson, and of course he was part of the Group of 7, and he summered in Wawa. And please tell us and the listeners about that, and just the kind of the trials and tribulations of trying to put a book of this magnitude together, especially because it's all about the art and much of it in the Wawa area.
Yeah, so this was a rabbit hole I went down about not quite 10 years ago now, but so I always knew as a child growing up that a member of the Group of 7 used to come up here. He had a cottage here. My grandparents had a tugboat, and they had other friends who had boats that used to take A.Y. Jackson out onto Lake Superior to go painting and exploring. So I knew there was a member in the area, but I didn't really understand that until I met a gentleman named Ken Ross, who was the son of the a couple that co-owned the cottage with A.Y. Jackson. And Ken's father wrote a memoir of the 29 years that they knew A.Y. Jackson, how they met, and how they purchased a cottage together, and then all the different places they went and explored. And pictures of the paintings that, sketches that A.Y. Jackson did at all these different spots between Sault Ste. Marie and Pucksaw. A lot of them in Lake Superior Park, a ton of them around Sandy Beach, between Sandy Beach and Pucksaw. So, and when I say a sketch, it was an oil painting that AY would do in 30 minutes. He would he would climb up on the edge of the shoreline, sit, and then he would sketch for 30 minutes, and then he'd turn his chair slightly and he would sketch for another one for 30 minutes. So he would come up for, between 1955 and 1966. He came up almost every summer for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, they would go and explore the shoreline. And he probably did 50 to 75 sketches each trip. There is no complete inventory of his works. He was an artist. He wasn't an organized person. So we don't know how many he did, who he sold them to. At the end of the 2 weeks, they would invite people to the cottage, and they would have a little gathering, bonfire, something to eat and drink. And he would have all his sketches laid out on the side of his cabin or along the driftwood on the beach. And you could purchase one, or you could ask for $40, $50, or you could ask him to make a larger painting back in his studio in the winter, and he would charge $300 or $400. So these sketches are turning up because he was also very generous. He would just give his sketches to people, thank them for letting him paint in the front of their camp or whatnot. So these paintings are showing up now all over the place, and because he was so particular about the image that he was portraying in his painting, you can tell, for those of us that have an intimate relationship with the shoreline, we can know exactly where he was sitting when he painted. So we're able to kind of do a little scavenger hunt all around Mishpicotton Bay, around Wawa, and find where he sat. And the paintings are still showing up. It's really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and that's going to be the book. And I know you've been working at it for a while, but we'll look forward to that. It's one of my biggest thrills, Ben, is to go there and sit or stand exactly where AY was. You know, georeferencing a photograph, or in this case, a painting, is wonderful. And there's all kinds of examples. So we'll look forward to that. And I encourage the listeners too to go to Wawa History, all one word, wawahistory.com, to see more about Johanna and of course purchase the books. And as you come up to Wawa, I highly recommend people going to Wawa. I'd have to say, if you ask me, because you will ask me sometime, what's my favorite place? I always say Wawa. I don't know what it is, and there's a whole bunch of other connections there over my whole lifetime. But as Johanna said, it's a real gateway, not into the hinterland, but to Lake Superior, and of course back in the day you'd get stuck at Wawa if you're hitchhiking across Canada. And that was before you were born, but nonetheless.
Thank you. One of the things I always I'm always interested in, Johanna, is what made you so invested in the history of Wawa? So from where you are, like some people aren't as tied to their community or to the history behind their community, but you're obviously somebody who's very passionate about it. So what started that fire inside of you?
I guess I'd have to say it's both of my grandmothers. My one grandmother was a teacher and principal in Sudbury, and so she was just very articulate and research oriented, and always digging into genealogy and whatnot. And then my other grandmother that I grew up with here in Wawa on my dad's side, who moved here with my grandfather in 1938 when they started the iron mining and sinter plant operations back up again. She was a storyteller, and her and my grandfather had a cottage at the mouth of the Mishpecotton River, and they were often approached by archaeologists who were looking for evidence of where the fur trading posts were, or if my grandparents had ever come across any artifacts, even First Nation artifacts or stuff. So the archaeologists would share the projects that they were working on. And then I just always remember my grandmother sharing those details and those stories about the good old days and the richness of the layers of history, literally the layers in the soil around our cottage of the history that she helped work with archaeologists. So honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So my parents had set aside money, and they said, well, you're going to university. What do you want to study? So I studied history. And so I went to Laurentian, they have a great library and a great history program. And when I was told I needed to do my fourth year honors paper, I said, well, I'm going to do it on the Mishpecotton area, and they encourage you to go to primary sources, right? So the Archives of Ontario, the Hudson Bay Company Archives in Winnipeg. And when I got into the bowels of those great resources and libraries and archives, I realized, oh my God, like, look at all of the stuff here that nobody knows about. And, able to piece together just the bare snippets of what my grandmother told me about. And then my other grandmother, sharing the research bug with me. The two of them just married together, I think. And I just realized that this is my destiny. I think I need to make sure that people don't forget about this stuff and people are aware. So then when I started getting summer jobs, I ended up getting a fabulous job at Lake Superior Provincial Park, working in the visitor services program, which is the Natural Heritage Experience program, I think now. And basically I was paid to tell people about the history of the landscape in the area and do research and learn about other aspects of the history and why Lake Superior is so connected with why people were attracted to the area. So although I've never really had a full-time job that pays all my finances and pension and whatnot in that aspect, I've been able to do it as a hobby, and it provides for me that extra on the side, and it just keeps my passion going. And to be honest, and this, Bill, that every time you come and talk to me, I'm down another rabbit hole, right? So I'm still learning. Like, I graduated from Laurentian in 90, and you can't make this stuff up. Some of the different rabbit holes I've been going down, it's fascinating.
Johanna actually, I think, epitomizes that there are museums societies everywhere and across Northern Ontario. And, from a colonial perspective, we don't have a couple hundred years of settlement history thereabouts. But she epitomizes that avocation and that passion to make sure that we don't forget and brings it to life, and not only in the projects, but the books. So it's a big shout out. And I think, going back to an earlier question, the first time when I met her or contacted her, I was speaking with someone that knew their stuff and had spent a lot of time of going down into archives and rabbit holes and oral history and all the. So she's exemplary when you look at the Northern Ontario landscape, and that's the best way I can put it. And I really do salute you, and I do salute Wawa, and I've said that. And it's one of those places, if you need to know something, that they've really done a good job at it. Thanks to you.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, and hopefully this starts a bit of the conversation about how can we get Wawa back to make Wawa great again.
I think Wawa's great right now, and again, I encourage people not just to stop and see the goose, but go out and explore all those many things, as it is in all our communities in Northern Ontario.
Well, we'd like to thank Johanna once again for joining us on this episode. If you want to learn more about what she's doing, like the doors that we talked about earlier, you can visit her website, wawahistory.com. You can also check out her other website, soulofsuperior.com. If you enjoyed this episode, new episodes come out every Wednesday morning. And of course, you can find the Backroads Built podcast on all of the main podcast platforms. The video version can be found on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, or you can find this podcast along with a large range of other styles of podcasts on our website, NorthBayEcho.ca. And also sign up for our newsletter while you're there, Echo Essentials. It's free. It comes to your email inbox every Tuesday and Thursday. It features all of the newest podcast episodes on our network, and of course, other news and events happening in the North Bay area. So join us again next Wednesday as Bill and myself bring you along for another Backroads adventure.